Now we're moving from parts of speech to parts of sentences. I'm having trouble inserting diagrams into these slides, so please open up to page 21 in your book and follow along with me. Before I load the next video, I will have figured out this problem, figured out how to add diagrams to these slides. So this 20-minute audio presentation is introduction to the parts of sentences and sentence diagramming, and will get you started with the concepts and with the homework 6A. So please open up again to page 21, and I'm going to briefly describe what the parts of sentences are, or syntax. Syntax is the technical name or the grammatical name for sentence structure. I like parts of sentences because it has a nice parallelism with parts of speech. My usage is not a technical term. It is only one that I use in this book. So be aware that you should say sentence structures or diagramming, or syntax when speaking with others. So there are 6 parts of sentences in English and in, I believe, any language actually. We have the subject, predicate, direct object, indirect object, subject complement, and object complement. What you need to know is simply that syntax, or the parts of sentences, involve only these 6 points, only these 6 pieces. There are many details that we need to learn about these 6 pieces, but this is it. So just as there are 8 parts of speech, there are 6 parts of sentences. Knowing those 14 components means that you know English grammar. So we'll begin to discuss what these are. First, be clear, and all of this is in the book, but I want to highlight some of the main points. Be clear that parts of sentences are not parts of speech. They are not parts of speech, so don't overlap the categories. They work very closely together and well together, but they are not the same. So if you look to the book, you can read a longer description of that. But parts of sentences are groups of words that enable you to put together a complete sentence in English. So we'll talk a little bit about what constitutes a complete sentence. Again, all of this is in the book. But I would just like you to remember, if you look to page 22, you will find a definition of a sentence. You can read all of the details, but the bottom line is a sentence, the item that includes these parts of sentences, is defined as having a subject plus a predicate with at least a main verb in that predicate. That is what defines the unit of utterance that we call a sentence. And the sentence, in fact, is the foundation of grammar. Grammar discusses sentences. Before you can well discuss sentences, of course, you need to know the parts of speech. But grammar, the focus of grammar is on the sentence. So we need to know the pieces that make up the sentence, parts of speech. Then we need to know the sentence parts themselves, how parts of speech combine or come together to make sentences, to become sentence parts. If you get smaller, or you're discussing issues smaller than the level, much smaller than the level of parts of speech, you're getting into the territory of linguistics. If you go larger and begin to discuss units of language beyond the sentence, you're entering the realm of rhetoric and composition. The unit that is the focus of grammar is the sentence. Again, those 3 levels, from the smaller linguistic level to grammar to rhetoric and composition, all themselves work together and overlap in a number of different ways. But grammar focuses on the sentence itself as a unit. So the sentence, again, is defined as having a subject plus a predicate with at least a main verb. I would like you to look very carefully at the definitions for the parts of sentences. You really need to know these precisely because this terminology and the way that people talk about subjects and predicates and so on can get quite sloppy. I myself get sloppy when I'm teaching composition because I fall into the shorthand that we tend to use when we're discussing these terms. So for example, I will say something like, identify the subject and the verb in the sentence, which is actually quite sloppy. A verb is a part of speech that is the minimal component within the predicate, but it's not the predicate itself. I should be asking students to look for the subject and then the predicate, the larger sentence parts, and then move them down from there. And sometimes I do, but we can get quite sloppy with this. Sometimes there are no immediate consequences of that, and it's completely fine to do that, but sometimes there are. And it's good to know the specifics of all of this material. So if we look to the subject, this is what we're discussing today. The subject on page 21 is defined as the word or group of words in a sentence that tells who or what acts, is, or is acted upon. Acts, is, or is acted upon. Again, that is a clunky but precise definition. A subject is not simply what the sentence is about, which is what I often hear, which is quite sloppy. It's not simply the thing or person who acts in that sentence. A thing or person can be acted upon. A thing or person can simply exist. We can have a form of the verb to be or some such verb. Something can simply be. Pam is a human. So, keep that in mind. The predicate on page 21 is defined as the word or group of words in a sentence that describes the acting, being, or being acted upon of the subject. That definition is parallel with the definition of the subject. So if we have a subject that acts or who acts, then we have a predicate that describes that acting. If we have a subject who is or that is, we have a predicate that describes the being or existence of that subject. If we have a subject who or that is acted upon, we have a predicate that describes the being acted upon of that subject, what's happening to that subject. That's the primary foundation for any sentence. So keep that in mind. Those are the two categories. Now if you move ahead in the book to page 25, I'm going to begin to show you how to set up a diagram that describes or gives a picture, a logical picture of how a sentence is working. So, if you look to the top of page 25, we see diagramming defined or described as a method of drawing logical maps of the relationships between sentence parts. Some of you may have diagrammed sentences before. I grew up on it. I was fed this from the time I was in second grade, and to be honest, I cannot understand what my writing would be like without knowing this. It's given me such a clear understanding of how sentences work. And it's given me a way to edit my own writing when I can't see my way through the writing. When, for example, I've been writing for a long stretch, or I'm stuck on an idea and I know something is bad in a sentence, but I can't find what. Diagramming gives me a way of stepping back and just looking logically at what my sentence is actually doing so that I can find the problem. So diagrams provide a logical map. They give you a picture of how the sentence parts are organized, what the logic of the sentence is. Diagrams do not give you a final expression of that sentence. They usually dictate pretty strongly what the final expression should look like, that is to say, what the written sentence on the page will look like. But they don't necessarily dictate exactly what it should look like. there's sometimes a great deal of variation. So we have the logic that the diagram provides, and then we use that logic to determine how exactly we want to express a sentence. Again, logic and expression work very well together, but they're not the same. So let's go to a very brief description of diagram, a very brief example on page 25. The first thing that you need to know is what in your sentence is the subject and what is the predicate. In this sentence, Pam runs, a very simple sentence, we have the subject Pam and we have the predicate runs. Pam is the kind of subject in this case who is acting. Runs describes her action. Here is how we begin to diagram, that is, to identify the sentence parts in any sentence. First, identify the parts of speech. Understanding what the parts of speech are in any sentence is absolutely critical to diagramming well, to understanding the parts of the sentences. So do that first when you're doing this homework, 6A. And actually, I'd like you only to do 6A for today, because I want to be able to to figure out how to diagram some sentences online to show you how to do some of this. But follow the book, everything is there. So just 6A, I'll send an announcement about that. Pam runs. We first draw a horizontal line with a vertical line cutting through it. This vertical line that cuts through the horizontal line separates the subject from the predicate. This is true for any sentence that we need to diagram. The nuns who taught me called this the crucifix of diagramming, and you can see why. Any sentence begins with a crucifix. It is the foundation. It is minimally a crucifix, minimally a subject with a predicate that includes a main verb. There are no other lines that cut entirely through that horizontal line. Remember this. Everything on the left, or almost everything, we'll see this later, pertains to the subject. Everything on the right pertains to the predicate. You can see already how very clear this is. If you turn to page 26, you will begin to see how we can add details to this diagram. We have the basics. We have the subject and the predicate at the top of page 26 in the sentence, "Tall Pam runs quickly." But now we're adding some details. Again, we have the foundational blocks, but now we need to add some details. Well, you add those details in a very logical way, directly beneath the word that they describe. If you move down to the second example on page 26, you will see additional details added to that same sentence. So now we have, "Tall Pam of Syracuse runs quickly in races." Tall is a simple adjective describing Pam, so it goes right under Pam. Of Syracuse is a prepositional phrase, which you've just learned. This prepositional phrase is an adjectival one, or as you say in the homework, an AJPP. It therefore goes directly under Pam because it works as if it were one adjective, just as if it were the word tall. On page 26, you see exactly how to draw a prepositional phrase. But you see how the diagram works beautifully clearly. Everything describing Pam, all kinds of adjectives, simple adjectives and prepositional phrases that are adjectives, go in the same place directly under the noun they describe. The same goes for the language, the extra details that describe runs. So look through that example. Now I would like you to open in the book. We're moving back a little bit. You'll see why. To page 15. Let me let you have a minute to get to page 15. And I will explain why we're going back to this page that we've not yet fully discussed. In order to be able to fully diagram a sentence, you need to know something else about verbs. There are three kinds of verbs types that do different kinds of work in a sentence. So not just simply as verbs with components and so on, but verb types describe the kind of work that a verb does in putting a whole sentence together. We've already seen the linking verb, and you can see the description here on this page and go through that again. There are two other kinds of verbs, or types of verbs. Again, this type describes what a verb does for the sentence, how it holds the pieces together. There's a transitive verb. This verb requires a direct object. So for example, John, noun, subject, through, verb in the predicate. So we have a crucifix that looks just like Pam runs, except we would have John through. So you can take a minute to write that down if you like. What did he throw? He threw a ball. The thing that he threw is necessary to complete the sentence. This through, then, is what we call a transitive verb. It is a verb that requires an object. The sentence would not make sense without that object. So here, that's the basic definition. Now if you keep your finger in page 15 and move ahead to page 27. So keep fingers on page 15 and 27, or pages 15 and 27. On 27, you'll see how to diagram, how to describe the logic of a sentence that includes a subject and a predicate and a direct object. You'll see the basic crucifix in this example on 27. Pam, subject who is acting, acts. What does she do? She put. What did she put? Well, she did put something. So that tells us that this verb requires an object. It requires a space for a thing if the sentence is to make sense. Therefore, put in that case is a transitive verb. We then draw on the horizontal line after put a short line that separates put from its object. We don't draw that line entirely all the way through the horizontal line. Only the main crucifix can do that. We write this small line which separates put, the verb, from its object, book. So we have then the subject, Pam, the verb in the predicate, put, the direct object in the predicate, book, and the complete predicate, the full predicate that you can read about when you read these pages is put the book on the table. That is the complete, the full predicate. That is everything that describes the acting of the subject. So that's how you diagram a transitive verb. Let's look to see how we diagram a linking verb. Again, keep page 15 open. Turn the page to page 28. Here we see a linking verb diagrammed. A linking verb, as you know, puts together or tells a subject with something about that subject, some sort of descriptive information. We've seen this, but we haven't fully discussed it yet. So linking verb is a form of to be, or some verb that does the same work as a verb to be. So we have here let's go to the second sentence actually, Pam is pretty. Pam is our subject. Is the verb and the predicate. So we draw our crucifix and we would have Pam is. What kind of verb do we have? That's the next question you need always to ask yourself when you're diagramming a sentence. Pam is. It's a linking verb. Pam's not doing anything, and that verb is not waiting for an object. So we can't do being to something. There's nothing that we have to act upon. So Pam simply is. This is a linking verb. She is something. What is she? Pretty. So this is here, or a linking verb, works exactly as if it were an equal sign. Remember that. A linking verb works exactly as if it were an equal sign. Pam equals pretty is the logic of that sentence, and that is the kind of work a linking verb does. To indicate that, we draw not a direct vertical line as we would with an object. We draw this slightly slanted line after the verb, after the linking verb. I think that's intended to suggest that the word pretty points itself back toward the subject. But in any case, when you have a linking verb, when you have a verb that says the subject equals or is something else, is a pretty, or is, in this example just above it, a person, you draw this slanted line, and then you add your additional information that describes the subject. And we call that information a subject complement. You can read about subject complements more in the book. The last kind of verb that we need to discuss so that we can fully diagram sentences, moving back to page 15, is a transitive verb. An intransitive verb. An intransitive verb is a verb that does not require a direct object and is not a linking verb. So, in the examples, we could say, let's look at the second example. She speaks quickly. She is the subject. Speaks is the verb. We're not saying anything about what she speaks. So, for example, we're not saying she speaks her speech quickly, in which speech would be an object. We're simply commenting on the fact of her speaking, that she speaks in a certain way, quickly. This verb does not require a direct object, and it is not a linking verb. It is not telling us that the she is something else or is equal to something else, as in Pam is pretty. We simply have, as the basic logic of the sentence, she, subject, speaks, main verb in the predicate. So our crucifix would be divided as so. She on the subject side, speaks on the predicate side. There's nothing else that follows on that horizontal line. We have our main information. That's the foundation of the sentence. Quickly, as an adverb describing speaks, of course, would go directly under speaks. That is how you diagram a sentence that includes an intransitive verb. So, I would like you to get started on this work with exercise 6A. I will send around these answers very soon to make sure that you're on the right track, and I will figure out today how to get these diagrams into the audio. So hold off on 7A for now. Just focus on 6A. And before I close, I will go through one last time exactly how I'd like you to do all of the homework for the rest of the course, actually. So first, when you have a sentence, you diagram all of the parts of speech, just as you've been doing for the last several weeks. Diagram all of the parts of speech in exactly the same way that we've been doing. Second, determine your subject and your main verb and the predicate. In each sentence, find the subject and the main verb and the predicate, and draw your basic crucifix. Third, identify the type of verb you have: linking, transitive, or intransitive. You need to identify that type so that you can continue to diagram the rest of the sentence. Fourth, diagram the sentence. There will be some small bits in exercise 6A that you won't yet know how to do, but play around with it. You'll know how to do quite a bit. You're going to need to take some time to read through the 10 pages or so on diagramming, but these are basic sentences. And I think you'll understand most of it quite well. Fifth, identify each sentence part. Know where the subject, predicate, and any other parts of the sentence are on your diagram. Sentences can include a number of different parts, but remember that minimally they have at least 2 parts, a subject and a predicate. The other additional parts, the other possible 4 parts that could appear, all appear in the predicate. Okay, best of luck, and I will work on loading this other video very soon, one that includes a walk through some of these diagrams.